Hello. As members meet in Beijing for the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, thousands of elected delegates are attending the National People's Congress, or NPC. This year, the two sessions will focus on the direction of the country as delegates offer suggestions and proposals on a 5-year plan, a roadmap for the national economy and social development. Later, we'll talk with several economists about China's transitioning economy. But for more on the two sessions, we begin with CCTV's Ming Tian in Beijing. Ming, thanks so much for joining us. Briefly, can you explain to us what the difference between the National People's Congress is and the CPPCC and why they are so important, please?
Right. The National People's Congress, or NPC, is the top legislature in China. Deputies are elected by the people, and through them, people would exercise state power. Each Congress is elected for a term of 5 years. The NPC meets in session once a year, and it has the power amending the Constitution and overseeing its enforcement, enacting and amending basic laws, and also electing and appointing members to central state organs. And the CPPCC, however, or Chinese People's Political Consultative Congress, is the top advisory body. It consists of members from the Communist Party, a dozen other democratic parties, and those without party affiliation. Members are recommended and decided by the Standing Committee. They are from all walks of life to have the broadest representation possible, including the search engine Baidu's president Robin Li and basketball star Yao Ming, for instance. The advisors would participate and deliberate state affairs. Then the NPC votes on policy decisions. So each would have their own responsibilities. And the meeting of the top legislators and advisors each year in China makes the top political season, which is called two sessions.
So what are going to be the major issues under discussion at this year's meetings?
Well, Premier Li Keqiang would issue the government work report reviewing the job in 2015 and set the target for 2016. China's growth target is widely watched both by domestic and international audience. And the premier would meet the press at the end of the NPC. But besides the usual arrangements, the public is keen to know the 13th five-year plan outlining China's development from 2016 to 2020. Given the country's economy is slowing and world recovery plateaued, what measures could Chinese government issue? Based on previous reports, we could expect destocking overcapacity in energy-intensive industries such as coal and steel, strong fiscal stimulus, and so on. Other topics include environment protection, poverty lift, cutting red tapes, and reforms on taxation and financial sectors. Back over to you.
Thanks. I'm sure the world is going to be watching. Thanks, Ming. That's CCTV's Ming Tian reporting. Appreciate it. Joining us from London is Stephen Perry. He's the chairman of the 48 Group Club, an independent business network promoting trade with China. And from New Haven, Connecticut, is Stephen Roach. He's a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and the former chairman and chief economist for Morgan Stanley Asia. And joining us from Shanghai is the chief economist with the Changjiang Pension Insurance Company, Pingkang. Thanks so much for joining us, all three of you. Before we get to the questions, let's hear from the chairman of the CPPCC.
With a focus on the implementation of the 13th five-year plan, the progress of the supply-side structural reform, and the major tasks of cutting overcapacity and excess inventory, leverage, costs reduction, and strengthening points of weakness will be put into effect in the 2016 plan of the CPPCC Standing Committee during political consultations.
So let's go to Shanghai first. Pingkang, we heard there a lot of focus on this 13th five-year plan, which takes us between 2016 and 2020. What's the focus? What are the key words we should be looking for here?
Well, in terms of keywords, I think people already got a clue from the CPPCC that started from yesterday. So 5 words for the big ideas is like innovation, coordination, green, sharing, open, But I think more practically, what people want to pay attention, and also I think that's what probably the NPC, the National People's Congress, will address tomorrow, are two big issues. One is the supply side reform, and the second is about economic growth. Because, we have to face it, because China now is facing an economic slowdown. But according to the plan set up about 15 years ago, is that by the year of 2020, we have to achieve the GDP level to be about 4 times as that of of 2000. Then by that calculation, in the next 5 years, we have to achieve at least 6.5% of annual growth. Then that's a big challenge. You know, that's a daunting task, particularly when we are facing these economic reform and structural reform. And also, I think that the NPC basically will cover, much like in the past, will cover a broader range of issues such as poverty reduction, agricultural modernization, financial reform, etc.
Stephen Roach at Yale in Connecticut, you've been studying the Chinese economy for a long time. What's different about this plan than previous ones?
Well, I take the point on the focus on supply side efficiencies, but I honestly feel that there's a far bigger issue that the 13th five-year plan will grapple with, and that is really pushing forward the impotence to rebalance the Chinese economy away from industrial activity towards services-led consumption. If China needs to do one thing in that regard, it is to enhance its commitment to build a social safety net, retirement, health care, Social Security, and the like, to give Chinese families the confidence to put their income to work in supporting consumption. Without that, the supply-side efficiencies will actually ring hollow in terms of driving the economy to its stated goals on development and growth.
You're right, the world is watching too. Stephen Perry in London, you know, obviously a lot of people looking for clues about the direction of the Chinese economy and development. What issues are likely to have the biggest impact on the rest of the world outside of China as well?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of them already. People get upset and concerned about the stock market, about the RMB. I think these are passing problems. I think they're inevitable when you go through a period of change that the sort that China's going through, that you will get some ups and downs and things will happen that were a little bit unexpected. But mainly it's the stability of 6 to 7% growth over the next 5 years, but the change away from low-cost exports to a more mature economy, spread more across the population in the way that Stephen Roach was just referring to. It's an economy in transition, and people should be probably less keen to judge each and every piece of news as it comes out and see it more in the context of transformation through to China's well-spoken targets of 2021. That's the first target that was set back in 1978. And I think they're well on their way to getting that right, but there'll be some ups and downs on the way.
Pingkang, in Shanghai, Premier Li Keqiang is going to outline in front of the NPC a government sort of progress report and looking forward as well, and GDP and development as well, focusing on the new normal of a higher efficient economy, but as you said, slower growth. What are some of the specific plans in that area that are going to create this transition?
Right. So, you know, China, we have to admit that China now are facing a lot of problems. But we have to separate the issue from this economic cycle versus a trend. Then what I think that Premier Li Keqiang will address is more about this economic trend related to the potential GDP growth. So then how to increase the rate of potential GDP growth is more about how to design or reform the system so that the system can work more efficiently to allocate resource from the less productive sectors to where it can be used more efficiently. So then it has to come with 3 elements, right? One is reduction. The second is addition. The third is the transfer of the resource in between. So I think that when it comes to the reduction, is a supply side reform. It's about more related to this cost cutting, the overcapacity cutting, and these destocking or de-inventory, etc. And then when it comes to the addition, as Dr. Roach just mentioned, is more about this, the change of the structural economy from this investment-driven to the consumption-driven, and then also about the implementation of this Made of China 2025 plan announced last year. And then when it comes to the transition, is more related to a broader spectrum of reform, but most importantly, of course, is the financial reform. Then also it is also related to the land reform, fiscal reform, etc. But I think that, you know, interestingly, the investors have already voted, right? The investors have already voted by the real investment decisions. For example, in the past February, the stock market in the Asia stock market in China really rallied, has a big rally, then it plunged, then it come back again, now it jitters. So I think that people around the country are really anxious, as much as we do, to know the specific plan to be announced in the next 10 days.
I want to get onto the stock market a bit later, but Stephen Roach, you've watched the Chinese economy for a long time. What specifically could you say where headway has been made in this transformation to this new normal, new type of economy, and what are the obstacles still ahead specifically?
Well, there are three building blocks for a consumer-led economy in China. More jobs by developing the services sector, and very good headway is being made there. Higher real wages through moving workers and families from the countryside to the cities. Very good progress has been made there. The third leg to the stool, though, is more problematic, and that is building a secure social safety net to give newly urbanized, newly employed services workers the confidence to spend it. And I think the 13th five-year plan must make a good deal of progress in that third leg to the stool, or the transition will be stymied and China will be stuck somewhere between the old model and the new model, and that's not good news. And
there are lots of specific policies actually addressing that sort of thing that are obviously filtering through the system. Stephen Perry, I want to bring you in on the stock market and the relation to the macro economy, because the West has sort of, at other markets, been looking and getting spooked by what's happened in the Chinese stock market and think it's a reflection of the economy. Is there some misreading here? Is there a false alarm?
Yeah, I think so. I think the issue here is that the stock market for China is a much smaller percentage of GDP than it is in, say, countries like America and Britain. And in countries like America and Britain, it's much more to do with merger and acquisition. And in China, it's about making sure that you circulate funds into productive capacity. And it's part of creating the welfare state as well, because a lot of the funds that are held in the markets will become, in due course, from the funds. So the idea that when China opened to Hong Kong, the corridor, that there was some disruption and some people tried to play some games, and those games were dealt with. Yep, it looked rather as if things were out of control. I think China expected what happened. Maybe they didn't communicate it quite as effectively as they might have done, but I don't think there's any real problem in Chinese stock markets if people understand the basic purpose of those stock markets in China, which is different from the West.
Yeah, I just want to add to the point that Stephen Perry just made. I agree with him, but the one thing that does concern me about the bursting of the stock market bubble in China is it is a setback for capital markets reform. China has a system of credit that is overly dependent on banks to allocate scarce capital. It needs a vigorous and vibrant stock market and a bond market to augment that credit intermediation process. And the stock market now is, I think, largely discredited as a viable alternative to the banks, and that is disappointing news on capital markets reform. But it is, I agree with Stephen Perry, it's not a threat to the real economy. Only 12% of the urban population owns stocks in China. That's 1/4 the ownership of, say, the United States.
I want to just bring in you, Pingkang, here before we go to break from Shanghai, because a lot has been compared to what's happening now in China to the 1980s in the US with Reaganomics, Ronald Reagan, and lots of talk about supply-side economics. For the non-economists in the audience, what does that mean?
Well, the emphasis of the Chinese version of supply-side reform is a little bit different from what we learned from the classical textbook. So what it is entailed is, actually what has been announced and what has been fully discussed in the media. That includes 5 elements, right? One is capacity cutting. The second is inventory cutting. The third is deleveraging. Then is cost cutting, and then the show up of the weak points. But then sort of for the capacity cutting is more related to some of the cyclical industries, such as iron, steel, ferrous metal, and cement, etc. Those industries are related to those most rapid pace of urbanization, which is kind of gone. So much of the capacity probably will never come back. And the inventory is related to the oversupply of the housing in the third and the fourth tier of the cities. Then the deleveraging and cost cutting is most related to those some called zombie enterprise that suck much of the financial resource but don't produce much. So I think that it represents those 5 elements.